I am your ever-vigilant host, Richard Syrett, and I want to dive headfirst into a scandal we've talked about before, but it should shake us all to our core. And I want to give some credit where it's due here. This story comes courtesy of our good friends at Blacklock's reporter, Tom Korski, Holly Doan, and their intrepid reporting. So let me start with the facts. Millions of your taxpayer dollars, over $12 million to be precise, $12 million were handed over by the federal government to the Kelowna area First Nation community. And this happened after they made this bombshell claim, of course, with few conditions attached and little oversight on how the funds were to be allocated back in 2021. Their bombshell claim that they had uncovered 215 children's graves at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. A claim, mind you, that was later revised to 200 potential burials. And here's the kicker. To date, not a single body has been recovered. Not one. Despite repeated requests from families to return remains, not a single shred of forensic evidence has been unearthed. And instead of rigorous archaeological and forensic work, do you know what that $12 million was spent? Publicists, consultants, marketing campaigns, speaking fees, tent rentals. You heard me correctly. $12 million? Was it spent on forensic work or archaeological work? No. Publicists, consultants, marketing campaigns, speaking fees. Over $500,000 for security. And let's not forget the plans for a museum and an elders lodge. Again, this coming to us from Blacklock's reporter. Don't get me wrong. Respect and care for our elders is important. But I think most Canadians assumed that money was going to actual grave recovery, not pet projects and PR campaigns. So let's rewind for a moment to the way this story unfolded. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, always quick to virtue signal, declared this horror over the supposed discovery. The national flag on Parliament Hill, Parliament's Peace Tower, was lowered for an unprecedented 161 days. The media, as they always do, pounced on this narrative with reckless abandon, painting a picture of mass graves and a national shame too dark to contemplate. And yet here we are, 3 years later, with not a single set of remains found. Zero. And now, thanks again to this report by Blacklock's reporter, we know that the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations worked overtime to keep the financial records under wraps, using bureaucratic red tape, stalling tactics, and confidentiality clauses to prevent public scrutiny. These records were only obtained after relentless efforts by investigative journalists and interventions from the Information Commissioner. They attempted to block access under the Access to Information Act until the Information Commissioner, Carolyn Maynard, forced their hand. What were they trying to hide? Well, now we know. $37,500 for marketing and communications. $54,000 in travel expenses. $100,000 for trauma counselors over 6 months. And a whopping $405,000 in administrative costs, which included speaking fees and tent rentals. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear about money earmarked for exhumation and forensic work being spent on consultants and press releases, I get a little suspicious. What did Ottawa do? Well, instead of demanding accountability, they doubled down on the narrative. Trudeau's government funneled even more cash into these efforts, while censoring every uncomfortable question raised. Even when Acting Director General Mandy McCarthy raised concerns about the lack of archaeological work being done, she was met with silence. And God forbid anyone dare to question the narrative. Kimberly Murray, the Cabinet's independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves, testified last year that skepticism could be construed as hate speech. That's right. If you question the facts, you're inciting hate. This is the Orwellian reality we now live in. Facts don't matter. Accountability doesn't matter. Only the narrative matters. So let's take a broader look at reconciliation efforts in this country, because the financial mismanagement in Kamloops is not an isolated incident. According to another recent report cited once again by Blacklock's, 9 years of symbolic and financial reconciliation efforts have not led to any tangible improvements in the quality of life for Indigenous people. Think about that. Despite billions of dollars in funding, focus groups of Indigenous Canadians themselves have questioned the point of it all, when many reserves still don't even have drinkable tap water. And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's take a trip down memory lane to 2015, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, another bureaucratic behemoth, defined reconciliation as the process of establishing mutual respect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Sounds noble, right? Here's the problem. Reconciliation has become a one-way street. Billions of dollars flow into the system, yet the same problems persist: poverty, addiction, crime, and despair. And a recent Privy Council report lays it bare. Reconciliation as currently practiced isn't working. Instead of fostering independence and economic empowerment, it's fostering dependency. Indigenous communities remain trapped in a cycle of poverty despite increased spending. Since 2015, federal Indigenous spending has nearly tripled, from $11 billion to over $32 billion. And yet the socioeconomic gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians has only slightly narrowed, largely due to the Canadian Child Benefit rather than any reconciliation initiatives. Crime and social breakdown. Indigenous reserves have some of the highest rates of violence, addiction, and sexual abuse in the country. A 2013 APTN investigation found a silent epidemic of sexual abuse on reserves, with hundreds of cases reported in a single territory. And yet, while politicians drone on about reconciliation, the root causes of these issues remain unaddressed. And this is exactly why many Indigenous Canadians themselves are questioning the government's approach. Again, according to focus groups conducted in prairie cities and supported by testimonials from Indigenous community members, Indigenous people want tangible improvements: better infrastructure, more jobs, clean drinking water, not symbolic gestures and endless virtue signaling from Ottawa. Let's not forget the 1969 White Paper, authored by Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien, which proposed ending the Paternalistic Indian Act and integrating Indigenous Canadians fully into society. A move that Indigenous leaders staunchly opposed, citing concerns over about the erosion of their cultural identity and treaty rights. Their opposition has since evolved, with many now advocating for self-governance and economic autonomy rather than forced assimilation, which proposed ending the Paternalistic Indian Act and integrating Indigenous Canadians fully into society. That policy was torpedoed by Indigenous leaders, who, perhaps seeing the endless river of federal funding at stake, preferred to maintain the status quo. Now, fast forward to today, and we're reaping the consequences. Endless handouts, no accountability, and a culture of entitlement that ensures true progress remains out of reach. The bureaucratic gravy train continues, and Canadians are left to foot the bill. The Kamloops scandal is a perfect microcosm of the entire reconciliation industry. Grand claims, no evidence, wasted money, and a media too afraid to ask tough questions. And the most tragic part, the people who suffer the most aren't the politicians or the consultants or the publicists. It's the Indigenous families who continue to live in poverty. trapped in a cycle of dependency and despair, while their so-called leaders rake in millions in taxpayer dollars. It's time for the mainstream media to start doing their job. Stop parroting government talking points. Start asking tough questions. We need a full, transparent audit conducted by an independent third party, maybe the Auditor General or a reputable forensic accounting firm, ensuring no stone is left unturned. This audit must include a comprehensive breakdown of expenditures, track the flow of funds, identify any mismanagement or misuse, and guarantee fairness and transparency of every dollar spent on Indigenous reconciliation efforts. Canadians deserve to know where their money's going. And finally, we need to rethink reconciliation entirely. Handouts and platitudes aren't the answer. Economic opportunity and true independence are. Hey, this is Richard Syrett. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe.